So we're starting this thing. So thank you for those who bared through the traffic to come out here. I know this is the first week of god-awful UCF traffic. So if you're on this side of town, you love your life right now. Other than that, so thank you. I knew this one was going to be a slightly smaller one, which is totally okay. We can't complain with that. But I do have an interesting little announcement. So September is going to be a pretty active month for all 3 meetups. Look out, if you're interested in JavaScript, look out for a lovely announcement when that sucker pops up on the JavaScript meetup. That's why I haven't announced that one yet, because I'm waiting for the title. I have IronYard's mobile demo day being on half of my mobile meetup. I'm taking over the iOS half in September. And our Ruby hits our 1-year anniversary next month. Next week is my 1-year anniversary. Yes, I had 3 weeks to throw together a meetup that I had 0 experience in programming language whatsoever, and somehow had to find speakers and get the meetup going, which ended up being, nope, that was the second one.
No, it's first.
Was it the first one that was your interview?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, that was Brian's interview to teach at the IronYard. David gave a talk on GitHub, or just Hub? Just Hub. Okay, yeah, just Hub. And Brian gave a really good talk and had no freaking idea that was part of his interview process. Flat out, while he's talking, I'm standing back there, and David's like, he has no idea, but I'm watching to see how he speaks because he wants to teach at the IronYard. And I'm like, all right, impromptu interview. So, and I know that David is now no longer in Orlando, which makes me sad. So David, I'm going to send you this video and say we miss you. He was my mentor. He helped me start all of this. Yeah, good. I'll go bug him. He helped me start all of this. I picked the day and everything. So with that being said, I have a little bowl up there, but I can definitely bring it around. If you guys have any ideas, anything you want to see, anything you want as a prize, anything food-wise, if you want to see it for our 1 year, I kind of want to make sure our 1 year stands out. I'm doing another one in October for JavaScript, and then one in November for mobile. But if you have any ideas for the Ruby, because you guys are my Ruby guys, I want to know. That way we get you guys involved as well. So either you comment in the 1 year, which is already up for next month, or you can put it on the little notes. So with that being said, luckily there's nothing going on this week, meetup-wise. Next Tuesday is Code for Orlando. So if you guys want to get involved with some random projects, get involved with their GitHub, some other stuff. So I do believe you can add whatever work you're doing to your own. So that might be something worthwhile for you guys that just graduated at the IronYard. You don't have to be a programmer to go. I could go if I really wanted to, but I start class next week, so I'm not. I'll be building models on Tuesday night. So, you know, you don't have to be a full-blown programmer to go, but it's at Canvas on Tuesday, and it's Code for Orlando. So, sorry, Scott, you're going to be talking with a fire alarm in the background, or car alarm.
Something like that.
All right, so car alarm aside, Scott, would you like to get up and give your talk? Scott's one of our guys. He programs over here.
Yeah.
There you go. You can give yourself your own little bio.
All right. I'm Scott Moe. I've been programming a long time, but now I'm programming here at CloudSpace and having a great time because I get through a lot of different things. It's kind of neat. I've been doing Ruby a long time, like, I don't know, 9-10 years now. So it's just a great language to work in. And my talk is on dependency injection, which is something you don't normally see associated with Ruby. Because we have better ways of doing a lot of things that dependency injection does. We'll go over here. Go through some of the greeting stuff. When I started to do this, I was working on an Angular project. And if you've done anything in Angular, you know that dependency injection is the heart of everything that's going on there. Everything gets hooked up through their dependency injection engine. So I was really curious what we have that would work that way in Ruby. And after digging into it a bit, there's a whole lot to it. It's kind of, not very well structured in terms of dependency. It's just all cross. So I decided to go through it just as I discovered it, just tell the story of what I went through putting this together. And there'll be some funny things on the way here, but I'll get into what all these mean as we go through them. The first thing I came across really looking into the dependency injection in Ruby is the things that I've had experience with working on it. The first thing, of course, is Dagger. And this is a package that you would use in Java, particularly for Android is where I used it. And it's just one way of organizing all the modules and things so that, instead of having explicit dependencies, you can just subscribe to a particular dependency and it will be provided for you. Very much like what happens in Angular 1.3. Angular 2 is out now, but it's still kind of flaky, so I'm sure they're having something very similar in the heart of that too, as far as all of the dependency injection that will go on there. Next thing I found going through was this blog post by DHH, who you probably all know is the guy that wrote Rails originally. And his blog post was titled, "Dependency Injection is Not a Virtue." And his primary thing there is that Ruby is really great at mutating and doing different things, monkey patching, and extremely testable, so that you don't really need to do the things that dependency injection gives you. He gave a real simple example. He shows the publish method here that just updates a model with a timestamp, and then he shows how you would go about testing it. Just monkey patch time so that you've got a fixed time that gets put in there, and then you can assert later on that that's the day that the article got published on. And if you've ever used a gem called TimeCop, it wraps this whole process up really nicely. So you can just make a couple of calls and freeze your time or travel through time and do different things. It's really handy for testing all kinds of time-based things that come up. That's one link I did not put in my links table, but if you're doing anything where you've got to test time-based things, and I've done things where you have to test subscriptions expire or deadlines are coming up, and it's really useful for that kind of stuff. But his quote out of this, and this is not really his quote, there's another guy that's got another blog post that mentions this, is that Ruby is Play-Doh, not Legos. And the whole point of that is dependency injection. You've got all these modules. This provides this particular interface, and this one consumes that interface, and the other one over here consumes them both, and you stack them all up and you swap them out for different things, and it's very structured, very brick-like in terms of what you put together in dependency injection. But Ruby is squishy. You can make it take whatever shape you want. You can patch things up. You can push something together. But what's nice about Ruby is you can make whatever you want to out of it. And it really works in any different way. It's a great language to work in. I've been doing it for a while, and I'm always learning new stuff in it, and it's just been terrific. And the main thing I love about it is how testable it is you can get in there and really have 100% confidence that your program's going to do what you want it to do. But you've got to know what it is that you want it to do first, of course. And Ruby isn't really against having dependency management. If you're familiar at all with the solid principles, there's a blog post on this one too. The D in solid is dependency inversion. For extra credit, anybody know what the other four letters stand for in solid? No? The S is for single responsibility. All your classes should have one responsibility. The O is open and closed, where you want to be open for extension and closed for modification. So all your objects should be able to move into something else, but you don't want to go in there and change fundamentally what a method does that somebody else might be depending on. L is for the Liskov substitution principle, which is harder to remember than it is to understand. It just means that if an object quacks like a duck, that anybody who needs a duck can use it. It's anything that responds to a particular interface, you can substitute in there, and it will fulfill the role of that object. And that's a lot like dependency injection there too, because that's the whole point of having a module that you can substitute for the module normally being used, and inject it into whoever depends upon it, and they will pick it up and use it. Now I forgot what the I was. Anyway, and D is for dependency inversion, but I'm sure the I is similar, but. And it all depends. There's a lot of different ways that we use dependency in computer science. Most of the time we're going to see explicit dependencies, and these are your typical dependencies where you reach out and say, I want this file, I'm going to use the contents of this file inside of my module and work with it. And you see these all the time in your includes, your requires, your imports. Every language has got this kind of thing, and it's very rigid. It's saying, I'm using this thing, and there isn't much way around it. If you want to trick that thing into using a mocked version of it or a variant of that object, it's just not going to work very well. There are a lot of package managers that work with this explicit dependency type thing. If you ever worked in Debian or Ubuntu, you're familiar with apt-get and the whole apt package management. It's amazingly how powerful it is for how old it is. Bundler is even better, but it's pretty new comparatively. And it's really awesome the way Bundler can work. If you've got any questions about what gems your system is using, you pull up your gem file and it's all right there. You can set your versions. It's not exactly dependency injection, but it gives you a lot of power over exactly what your dependencies are and what's going to be provided. It's almost an implicit dependency because your gems are being managed for you. You can go in there and pick up the one that's being provided by the system at that point. But generally when they say implicit dependencies, what they're talking about are system libraries, things that you really have no control over what is going to be in the computer provided. And that has led to a lot of problems historically. I don't know if anybody else here is old enough to remember DLL hell from early Windows programming, where they would just update a DLL and all the programs that used the previous version of that library would begin to crash randomly in unexpected ways. And, well, the other thing that can go wrong are cyclic dependencies. And these are, you can see this in your own code. If you were to write a couple of modules that depend upon each other and try to run them, you would see real quickly what that leads to. You just can't require things in a cyclic way. And that leads to one of the primary concepts of dependencies in computer science. That's acyclic dependency. If you see this little graph here, you see that absolutely none of these nodes none of these paths form a complete circuit. You can't depend upon something that depends upon something that depends upon you. And this is called acyclic dependency. It's key to anything that you're structuring in terms of how your code is going to relate to other programs that you're working with. This is a little bit out of Dagger. If you can't see that code, you can see it pretty well, but it's Java, so it doesn't really matter. But you see the first half of this is all explicit dependencies, things that get loaded up and laid out, and I can't see the code, but and then the key bit here is this little module, and this describes this section here. This is called an annotation in Java. And these are other annotations that provides the singleton. And it's saying that we're going to provide a motor function, and this is declaring what it is. We're going to provide a vehicle function. This is describing what it is. And what they call this in Dagger is a directed acyclic graph. And that's the same thing as this. You see the directions on there. It's a directed acyclic graph, and that's where they get the word Dagger from. It's just a clever little play on the term. But basically, every time you're going to have a different scenario in Dagger, whether you're going to run in development, or if you're going to run off a test server, or if you're going to run in production, you might have a different module that you would link in to your build and set up a different graph. And you can imagine this as an actual graph, where you have one of these boxes that's a motor, and another one that's the vehicle, and they all relate to each other in the code that describes what that graph is. And this is kind of a nice way to be able to work with your blocks of code. And even though Ruby is amazingly flexible, at some point you are going to have blocks of code that you want to be able to swap in and out and work with in different ways. Jim Wirich wrote the gem that is probably the best thing I've seen to do this in Ruby. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Jim Wirich. An amazing talent, and he passed on recently. It was really kind of a sad day, but this is the guy that wrote XML Builder. He wrote Rake. He wrote just 1,000 programs you guys might use every day and not even know. Just an amazing guy, including this gem. It's available called DIM, and it's dependency injection minimal. And it's a pretty simple thing. It's not nearly as crazy as that Dagger code that we saw. It's pretty straightforward. And here's a little code that is taken from a project I'm working on now, but scrubbed to meet all the non-disclosure requirements. In my initializers, this is a Ruby on Rails project, I set up a server container, which is using that dim gem and the container object. I create a new one of those and just start registering different services with it. So if I'm in test environment, I'm going to be using my bogus backend service, and if I'm any other environment, I'm going to be using the real backend service there. And this is just a real simple way. If I'm going to be running RSpec or Cucumber or any other test environment, I don't have to worry about trying to mock out this back-end service before every time it gets called. I don't have to worry about which tests are going to hit it and which tests aren't. I just substitute that module out, and I never have to worry about it again. Every time I run test, it is running my bogus back-end server. It does not go out on the internet. It just looks for whatever calls I want to work with and returns what I want it to return. I've extended this a little bit too, so that back-end server will actually have a few extra methods I can call from my test setups and say, this time I want you to fail, this time I want you to pass, this time I want you to give me a different kind of message. Whatever's going on there, I can tell it to work with that. And then in my regular code here, this is an auto-load back-end server service module in the next column over there. And this is the main code that the application depends on. So this loads up every time the app starts up, and it provides this back-end server class. And by hitting the server container and initializing it and providing a call method, it exposes what that back-end server would do. So by adding that little layer in there, I now can swap things out pretty much willy-nilly however I want. And this is just one example using a back-end server. It's worked out really well for us in the testing on this project, but there's a lot of other things you could do in the real world. Payment services are one of these things that is most important to be able to do this with. When you're running a test server, you don't want people to actually hit your credit card service and make real charges. You don't want to be hitting any kind of financial system and generating real transactions. So if you can be 100% sure that nothing like that is going to happen because you've got a DAG system in there, and it's just not going to happen. It's just really valuable. CDN is another good example. You don't want to be uploading files every time you run your tests that go through a photo upload or something like that. So if you can stub out S3 and just have it respond, and know that when you run a test, you never have to worry about which tests are going to hit S3 and which ones are not. You just, if it happens, you're covered. Localization is another good example of something you might want to do. If you have an international app, or even an app that is going to behave differently in different U.S. cities, you can swap out a module and say, well, this is what we run when we're in Detroit, and this is what we run when we're in L.A. or swap it out for languages too. It's just gives you a flexibility for some modules. There's other ways to do it, but certainly dependency injection is something that you can do that with. Other types of customization. You might have an app that you reskin for various clients, and it's a great way to provide all the essential elements that you want to update in different scenarios. And just by doing that custom module and setting it up to be injected, now the code just comes up and uses that particular flavor of the app. Here are all the links, or most of them, that I put up there. I'll leave it up there for a little bit, and I don't know if you guys have got any questions. Probably went too quick for you, but that was about 20 minutes.
Any other random Ruby questions you guys might have for him? A brain full of knowledge in there.
I've been doing this a long time, so.
He is a great guy to ask any kind of reference question or anything on.
Alrighty then. Now, if you come up with something later on, feel free to come and ask me. I'll be around. And yeah.
Have you, in your wealth of experience, have you come to some conclusions as to whether to write a project in Ruby on Rails or in Python or in C#?
Well, I have done some C++, but I've never worked in C# or Python.
How do you
but-
pick if you're looking for performance, if you're looking for reliability, which of those languages seem to be?
There are different qualities to each of these languages. The reason I like to go with Ruby, and performance is not Ruby's strong point, but once it's loaded and running, I have very little trouble with it. But it is amazingly testable, and that's what I love about it. I can make sure that Ruby does what it's supposed to do. If I've got a financial app or an app that really has any kind of value that is important, I want to make sure it's tested thoroughly, and I want to make sure it does the same thing every time. And Ruby is really what does that the best. I was doing tax software 10 years ago or so when I started getting into Ruby. And it was just, what we used to have to do is we'd have 2 IRS enrolled agents, and they would work for 2 weeks, printing out all the tax returns, everything that we worked on. And when we got that done in automated testing, it would take an hour, and everything was tested just as well. So it's incredibly valuable, especially if you get in and say, well, I really need to change the way this back-end service works, or I need to hook up a different back-end service. All your front end is supposed to still be doing the same thing the same way. You've got your automated test, and you can be sure that nothing odd breaks along the way, and that every little bit of it has been gone through. So testing is the main thing that brings me to Ruby. But if you really want performance these days, I probably want to go with Golang from Google. It's a more modern language than, say, C#. It's compiled, so it's still going to be faster than Python, and it really provides a lot of good low-level systems. And you can deploy it as a Google app, which makes it really effective. But
In terms of maturity of debug environments, to try and track down where does Ruby sit?
Ruby is really strong in debugging. There's a lot of different ways to go. There's pry, binding.pry, and you can run that anywhere in your system, and it will just pop up when you hit it, whether you're in the middle of a test suite or in the middle of running a web server. You can just stop execution, and you've got a full debug environment. You can inspect all your variables, you can go into objects, you can step through code. I don't really use it much. For me, testing is the main way that I try to make sure that things work well. Run a little test at a time, and make sure that everything passes and it works real well. Go is probably less mature in terms of testing, but they've got a really good tool set just the same. Other things, Ruby works with a lot of different systems, so it's pretty good. But any of these, that you're going to have to invest some time to get, the chops to really figure out what's going on. But, yeah.
The dependency injection example, where you had an initializer set up to swap out what kind of service was being used.
Let me get back to it here.
Yeah. Is that something that, if you're using that in testing, do you need to also make a note in the test file that this is happening? Because I could see where that might sort of surprise people if they weren't familiar with you written that code.
Yeah, that is probably a good point, that if you're expecting your test to go out and hit, the real back end.
Or if it's not explicitly said or stuffed out
Yeah.
somewhere within the test files, how do you know that change has happened?
Well, that's a good point, because the advantage of having that happen automatic is that you may not be aware of it. But it is there, in the initializers and in the back end there. You can see that it's going to the server container to find things. So if you were curious about it, it shouldn't take too long to dig down as to why it isn't actually calling the back end service in test, but it is in production.
Is server container kind of a limited use enough phrase? If you do like a global search on it, you'll find it in the initializer and maybe 2 or 3 other places.
Yeah, the container is really kind of the key there, because that's what Jim Warish used as the name of the class that DIM provides the server container from. So that's really the key there. If you're seeing that, you're probably looking at somebody's using DIM to do some kind of dependency injection. This is really not used very often in Ruby, because it is so powerful in terms of just being able to mock and stub and do things explicitly, and that probably is the danger, that people are so used to doing it that way that they don't understand that we just swap that whole module out. We don't have to worry about mocking it in tests. But well, I see a lot of times, if you've got a fairly complicated system, you might start off, you get one piece at a time going, and you get to the point where, gee, every time that, somebody creates one of these objects, I'm calling here, there, and telling everybody about this, sending off emails and updating this other log, and at some point, there's so many things that you've got to mock and stub and handle that your test fixtures get to be kind of out of hand. And this does help to keep it clean and pretty neat. So anything else? All right, I didn't wear a name tag, so I'll just...
Oh my god, I love that. Yes.
All
By
right.
the way, if you guys haven't noticed, I really love silly photos in your presentation. That's where the goat That's where the goat came in. Where my dogs were. Alright. So Scott, give me the knife.
All right.
Alright, so most of you guys already know, but our next presenter just came out of Iron Yard. So he's a newly recent grad and is looking for a job.
Yeah, hire me.
Everybody on YouTube, anybody who's watching, he is looking. But I will let you
Introduce myself.
introduce yourself, because I know a little bit about you, but I don't know much else.
That's cool.
I know you do some really cool, crazy shit, but that's about it.
Yeah.
Let's see if your computer likes this, or we do 2-player.
Huzzah.
Woohoo!
All
All
right.
right, connect that stuff up.
All right. Hey guys, my name is Eric Jenks. For the back half of the room that doesn't know me, yeah. So my talk tonight is going to be less technical, more philosophical, kind of just an idea for people to throw around. It's something that I've been thinking a lot about since finishing the Iron Yard. So about me. Yes, I'm a former ninja, actually still probably a current ninja. I've been involved in martial arts my whole life. The reason I say that is because it'll come into play further on in this presentation. Again, I'm an Iron Yard grad. Just finished about 2 weeks ago, longest 12 weeks of my life, but it was fun. You can ask any of us who just finished. And I'm a Rails developer. It's just the logo of my final project, which is currently in production. People are using it. It's awesome. So, big picture concepts. before I start, I've spent the last 10 years of my life teaching martial arts. I've been teaching karate, taekwondo, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, anything you can think of, I've taught it. The reason that I bring this up is because when I was teaching before, I wouldn't teach minute details to a new student. I wouldn't teach, how important hip rotation was right away. I would teach the big picture concept so somebody got an idea of what they were doing and how they were doing it. The reason I bring this up is because I think big picture concepts are often overlooked in software development. So I'm just going to kind of relate that to Ruby and Rails and go from there. So basics. As with anything else, we all know basics are important. If anybody's ever tried learning a language, which all of you have, you probably don't remember how you first started learning, but let me just kind of give you a quick overview of how I first started. So typically you start learning about strings, integers, floats, things like that. Pretty simple. Little example, strings is a string, integers and floats. But nobody really talks about the why. Nobody talks about why you learn these things first or what you do with these. You kind of just say, hey, open up your command line and do this. And it's magic. But why? Next, you go to variables. It's kind of like that natural progression of going to the next thing. So, you can take that string that you just created and assign it to this thing called a variable. Great. And then you can just use that variable and call that string again. All right, so we're getting somewhere. We're kind of building something, but what are we building? It's not explained as to what you're actually doing with these things. And then you have things like arrays. Okay, well, we all know now that arrays are a collection of things, right? You can instantiate a new array. You can put stuff in that array, and that array will hold those things. Great. Well, it looks like this array is holding some integers. The reason I'm saying this is because you start at the most basic concept, and then you build up to the bigger picture, but you're not really doing anything with these things right now. You can call methods on them, but wait, we haven't really talked about methods or hashes. So you have a hash. Hash is a collection of paired things. Okay, that's great. So now I have one collection of one type, and then I have a collection of another type. Great. These are all basics that we've all learned from day one. You read Chris Pine's book, Learn to Program, and he talks about things in these orders. But he doesn't talk about the big picture of why you need to know these things. Then you have things like methods. All right, so a method does things. This is a really very simple Rails method that you usually see, one of the first things you see. And you can kind of, by looking at this, get some of the things that we just did, but not a whole lot. You can see a variable in there. You see that it's a method. Great. But what does it do? Why does it do what it does? And then finally, you have classes. Now, classes is when it kind of gets a little funky because strings, integers, and floats, those are all classes. Now, for people who have been developing for a long time, probably don't remember going through these things. But when you're first learning, it goes way over your head and you don't understand the why. And I think why is important. I was a history major in college. So the why of things is extremely important. Why did this happen? What does it mean for us today? The why is rarely talked about in the beginning. And I think if we kind of started teaching people that way, we would kind of have a better way of teaching. So here's a nice method that I created. This is actually from one of my projects. We did something called the Iron Yelp. And so it kind of just takes the hours of restaurants around Orlando and does stuff with it. It just asks simply if those restaurants are open right now. So when I broke this down after I did it, things finally started to get together because this is a big picture type of thing. Okay, so we have a method, right? Makes sense. Okay, so we have some variables thrown in there too. Awesome. You're setting the variable in one spot and then you're actually using it in another. Don't get me started on if-else statements yet, because that's a whole nother animal when you're learning. Then you can say, oh look, there's an array with a string in it, but that's actually an object. And wait, we didn't talk about objects because we haven't talked about the big picture yet. And then you have classes in here, but a class is in that variable. And then you have integers thrown in there too. when I finally sat down and broke it down that, all of the things that I had learned are finally being put together, it made sense to me. If somebody had shown me this and said, here are all the things that you're learning, you're going to do something with it, and here's where it's all going to fit in, programming would have made a lot more sense to me in the beginning, but it took me a while. Because we all learn differently. We all, see things from a different perspective. I'm more of like a see the big picture type of person. So now we're going to go even crazier. Now we're going to go to Rails. This is when it really gets insane. Because the first time you open up a new Rails project in a text editor, you see this. And you're like, wait, what's a model? I didn't learn that when I was learning Ruby. What's a view? What's a controller? You don't talk about what those things are when you first start, and this is exactly how you feel. Yeah. First time I ever started a Rails project, that's exactly how I felt. I was just so stunned that I had no idea what the hell I'm even looking at right now. Because it's not explained to you initially. You just say, hey, do Rails new, and you have a new project, and boom, you have all this stuff. And I know some people in my class don't like magic, and that's pretty much what it is. So, yes, what exactly? So, this is actually a diagram that I found when I was first learning Rails, and this to me makes sense because this is a big picture type of idea. And I'm sure we've all seen something like this, but it wasn't until I saw this that the idea of a model, view, and controller made sense. Again, everybody learns differently. We all have to see things from a different light. Okay? So, great. What happens when we do this? Oh man, look at that. This is actually an example from Brian when we were learning OAuth, which is, oh my gosh, the bane of my existence when I first started learning it. And you look at that as a new developer, and you're like, what the hell is this? What are all these random things in here that I have no idea of? But if you're first learning it, you can kind of get an idea. Because when you know the big picture and then you start breaking it down, you see some methods in here. You see variables. You see arrays and strings and all those other things. Oh, now I'm like Dr. Seuss. So, which leads us to this. Documentation. It's not designed for new developers, or maybe it's just bad for me. This is how I feel when I have to go learn something new, and the documentation is awful. Because documentation is broken down like this. This is straight from Ruby Docs. Okay? This is pretty much all it gives you. Maybe it gives you a sentence or two, and it says, hey, you can do this stuff to an array. But why? Why would you want to do this stuff? It's, well, first of all, you see this little hash rocket thing almost all the time, and if you don't know what that was, somebody had to explicitly explain to me what that was for it to make sense. So, then you have the Rails guides, which are another animal in and of themselves. And when you're first learning Rails, you're like, oh my gosh, what are these random things around what look like Ruby constructs? So documentation is geared towards people who learn from a small picture detail. They're for the people who can look at something in this little tiny detail and then extrapolate upon it. But for somebody like me, this isn't going to make a whole lot of sense. And then you have this. Again, OAuth, the bane of my existence. This is the usage example from OAuth 2 on GitHub. This is all you get. This is it. It doesn't say, hey, maybe you should throw this in a controller, or maybe this should go somewhere else. This is all you get. This is the example. And so this is exactly how I felt when I started learning that one. Yeah. I'll let you watch that one a few times because this is one of my better GIF finds. Every time I have to do something with OAuth, this is how I feel. Yeah. All right. Moving on. So here's a good example of documentation something. This is actually a example project for the Stripe API. And the things I like about this are the comments in it. The guy will say, hey, see this other spot for details on why this works. He built a good example. If you're someone like me and you find a good example project, it means all the world because you can see it in that big picture context. I can't always just look at documentation and understand how it works. if I see it in works, like in process, it makes more sense because you have that big picture sense. So, why the big picture matters. Everybody has a different learning style. As an instructor, I do understand that. There are beginners and experts. And this is kind of why I want to bring this up, because everybody at one point was a beginner, but when you're a so-called expert, you don't remember what it's like to be a beginner. I know now if I tell somebody to do a front kick and try to explain to them how to do it, they're going to look at me like I'm crazy and be like, I don't understand. And it's probably going to look really ugly because I forget what it's like to be a beginner. And then why this all matters. So, learning styles. Yeah. You have visual learners. I'm a huge fan of wiener dogs. I have two, so you might see a few wiener dog gifs in here. Visual learners. You can look at documentation and you can get it. You can kind of read through it and it'll make sense to you. Auditory. I'm an auditory learner. So if somebody explains to me how to do something and kind of walks me through that process, it'll make sense to me. I remember one day we were talking about class methods, I think, and something that Brian said finally made it click in my brain. You know, I'm an auditory learner. I have to listen to things to understand them. And then finally, you have kinesthetic learners, the people who learn by doing. I think everybody is this in some form or another. When you build something for the first time that's not a tutorial, it clicks. So these are the three basic learning styles, and I think a lot of times we only cater towards the one type, and that's visual learners. There's documentation everywhere, but it's not always good. But if you're a visual learner and you can read it and comprehend it, then you're good to go. But what if you're the other two types? So we have beginners versus experts. This is exactly what I was talking about. You have beginners who look like they know what they're doing. Sometimes you might try, you might fail. But then you have experts. So you have experts who really look like they know what they're doing and can do it over and over and over. This idea of beginner versus expert is extremely important right now just because there are so many people who are becoming developers. So, things that beginners struggle with. Navigating the command line. I know the first time I ever opened it, I was like, oh crap, I'm going to break my computer. Yeah. For experts, it seems like it's second nature. This is what a beginner looks like. You get syntax errors every 2 seconds. You feel like this little girl. If you're an expert, yeah, you look like you're hacking the matrix. Vocabulary is very difficult for a beginner. Syntax, strings, arrays, hashes, all these things. It's like you literally are trying to learn a different language. And then experts see this vocabulary as their source of knowledge, almost like their Bible. You can talk to an expert and they'll be able to throw around all these big words. And as a beginner, you're like, metaprogramming, what the heck's that? And then you have different tools. Tools are important. With a tool, you can really build a lot of things, but with an expert, their tools look like magic. As a beginner, you feel like this when you're trying to use your text editor for the first time. You're like, there are all these files, there are all these folders, I can do what with shortcuts? An expert, expert looks like this when they're doing things. Just a pro at everything. But sometimes things blow up. But it's okay, because you can always fix it. So, then documentation. Again, I bring up documentation because I think it's where we're struggling the most as a community. As a beginner, you can look at documentation and you're going to feel lost because there's so much in there. I wish sometimes documentation had a too long didn't read section because then it might help. Like here's the very fundamental things that you need to know. And then for an expert, documentation is just a guide. This is what a beginner feels like when they're reading documentation. You're looking at a map, you don't know what to do with it, you don't know where you're going. Hey, it might help. And then if you're an expert, well, you're Indiana Jones. Who cares what happens? A big giant stone ball might be running towards you or rolling towards you, but it doesn't matter because you know what you're doing. Or you look like you do at least. So, why should we care? We should care because there are a growing number of developers. I'm one of them. My recent IronYard grads are another. There are development boot camps popping up everywhere. There's such an ease of getting access to information now. You think about all the free resources there are. You have the Odin project, which is a Learn to Program in Rails project. You have Free Code Camp, which is for JavaScript. You have paid things like Code School and Treehouse. And so you have people who are jumping into this thinking, hey, this is going to be awesome. But all of these things teach the same way. They teach from, strings to classes. They teach the same way, but we're not really thinking about the variety of people that are coming into this. We have changing technologies. We all know how fast things can change. You have like Rails 5 coming out soon. You have a new JavaScript framework popping up every 30 seconds. Things change quickly, so we have to adapt. We have to understand that there are different people in this field and, kind of not cater to them, but understand that there are all these different people. And this leads me to the last one, inclusivity. One of the things that I've heard since I began developing a while ago is how much of a push there is for inclusivity and diversity. I think every single podcast I listen to mentions it at least once. Every article says it a couple times, but it's important to be diverse and inclusive. But if we're going about teaching things and learning things the same way, are we really being inclusive and diverse? Or are we just doing the things the old way? You can include different types of people and whatnot, but if you're not looking, at why they're doing these things or how we're teaching them, we're really not being as inclusive as we think we are. So this is not the most technical talk because, like I said, I graduated 2 weeks ago, but this is kind of something that I thought about while I was learning. We had a wide variety of different people in my program and the other programs, and it's hard. It's hard to learn. I went from learning nothing to trying to learn Rails, and if you have never programmed a day in your life, man, you're going to want to throw your computer against the wall every 30 seconds. So, I think this is something that needs to be talked about and discussed more because there are so many people coming into this field. I love programming. It's like martial arts for your brain. You're struggling with these creative concepts and you're trying to wrestle with topics, but it's awesome. So, if anybody has any questions, feel free to ask. I might not be able to answer all of your dependency injection things. Uh-oh, what's going on the Fritz? And,
That's weird.
uh-oh.
There we go.
Okay, that's my contact information. If you want to talk to me, yeah.
All right, if you had to do it all over again, would you do it?
Oh, absolutely. I would do it.
Step outside.
He was his teacher.
Yeah, he was a teacher. Oh yeah,
Bar.
I would absolutely do it all over again. I see nothing wrong with it. I'm one of those people though that, I'm a bulldogger, so if I have a problem, I will fix it or I will not sleep until it is fixed. But, there were people in our program who didn't have that, persistence and weren't able to do it because it was hard and it didn't fit in with their learning style right away. But no, I wouldn't do it over again at all. So, yeah.
For a Ruby noob such as myself, where just thinking about doing it a couple weeks ago, where should I get started?
Oh man. I think the best thing to do is identify how you learn. I think that's important, and then once you figure out, how you learn, then you can kind of game plan everything. I believe in game planning everything. I'm not the biggest planner when it comes to building stuff right away, but I like to game plan life. I like to kind of think of a plan of attack. So figure out how you learn. Try to identify resources like that. I'm a big picture person. Once I diagrammed out this giant class and method and stuff like that, then things started to click for me. And then I understood what strings did and what these arrays were supposed to do. That stuff started making more sense when I figured out how I needed to look at it. So that's what I would recommend first.
Did you start looking at Ruby on your own?
The first thing I did ever was Code School's Rails for Zombies. And I would not recommend that for somebody looking at code for the first time ever, because they have you jumping all over the place and trying to do things that if you don't understand syntax, you're not going to understand it at all.
It's excellent for somebody who's coming from a PHP background or from a Java background and knows basically what the code is accomplishing.
Yes.
Aware of how Ruby accomplishes.
Exactly. Yeah.
Don't know what's going on.
Yeah. Now going back to it, it makes a lot more sense. But no, I would start I actually started off in Rails before I ever started learning Ruby. And in a way, it was good because I did see the big picture of how things were supposed to work. I just didn't understand the why those things worked. So I did see the big picture, and then once I started learning just vanilla Ruby, it all started to click for me. So, you know, I know a lot of people say, learn Ruby first, don't learn Rails. But for me, it helped because, you know, once I did understand the Ruby, Rails just clicked. So, yeah. Any other questions? Oh gosh.
How do you want to utilize that big open closed method that you showed, that you said this is where things clicked? Would you say, like, day 1 or 2, we're going to learn how to solve the problem that's embedded in this thing? Or would you say, let's talk about the problem and just discuss how it can be solved without reference to code?
I would use that as almost like a roadmap. Be like, okay, here's the problem that we have. Here's what we want it to do, and let's see it in action, and then let's break down what in this method would actually accomplish that. And that's kind of like what helped me the most, is when I saw what each piece did and how it fit into it. That's what made sense. So, anybody else?
Do you know who a Jessica is?
Hmm?
Do you know someone by the name of Jessica? All right, well, somebody who's watching on YouTube who said, great job, Eric, you did fantastic.
Cool. Sweet. Great. Thanks. Awesome. Thanks, guys. That was fun.
We've had 3 to 4,
Nice.
and that'll bump up by the end of the week.
Yeah.
All right. So, I gotta grab my computer, but I'll shut down YouTube here in a second. So did anybody think of any ideas yet for next month?
Distracted by this.
Bounce house.
Bounce? Whoa, now.
I think our ideas will get better as we have beer.
I like that idea. So, with that being said, did everybody grab a ticket coming in? You might want to get that out. So if you guys were not here, all right, bye YouTube. I'm shutting you down. I'm not trolling myself.
What if they want to see the rap?
No.
They can't win.
They did that one time, and I trolled myself. Go find it on YouTube. It happened. I argued with myself with YouTube in front of everybody because it delays by 30 seconds. So